I was sitting in the crowded waiting room of my doctor's office in downtown Providence when my phone rang and I saw David's name flashing on the screen. My only son. The boy I raised with every ounce of love I had. The man I thought would be by my side in my final years. His voice, usually warm and rushed with impatience, sounded cold, rehearsed almost, as he said, "Mom, Melissa and I are leaving tomorrow for Europe. The Cape Cod beach house and Dad's old Ford are already sold. We needed the cash. Take care." And just like that, he hung up. No goodbye, no pause to let me process, no space for a reply. 43 years of raising him, working double shifts after his father's back injury, sitting through every Little League game, every heartbreak, every graduation, pouring myself into him so he could have a better life. And he discarded me like yesterday's junk. I sat there in the squeaky plastic chair, surrounded by coughing strangers, clutching the phone in my hand, but strangely, I didn't cry. For the first time since my husband Michael died 6 months earlier, leaving me in a silence that swallowed the house whole, I felt something different, a calm determination. Because there was something David and Melissa didn't know. My name is Annette Sullivan. I'm 71 years old, recently widowed, and I thought I knew my son. But in that moment, staring at the posters of blood pressure tips on the doctor's office wall, I realized I didn't know him at all. When Michael died of a heart attack one October morning at our kitchen table while buttering his toast, he looked up, smiled like he had every morning for 45 years, and said, "Good morning, sweetheart." Those were his last words. Since then, David had been coming around more often. He'd insisted on helping me with funeral paperwork, tagging along on grocery runs, even urging me to get a checkup. "Mom, you need to take better care of yourself now that you're alone," he'd say with that crooked smile I thought was love, but now realized was calculation. The Cape Cod beach house? How could he? That house wasn't just wood and paint. It was our family sanctuary. Michael and I scraped together pennies to buy it when David was 15, sacrificing vacations, driving our old Buick until it groaned, clipping coupons at every store. Every summer we drove down to the Cape, building memories in sand and salt air, barbecues on the deck, 4th of July fireworks on the beach, birthday cakes with sparklers melting in the breeze. David brought his college buddies there, later Melissa when they started dating. I cooked and cleaned and watched them laugh under the porch lights, thinking those were the moments that stitched us as a family. And the car. Michael's 1968 Ford Galaxy, the pride of his Sundays. He polished that baby every weekend, changed the oil himself, parked it in the same shady spot under the oak tree, talking about handing it down to David one day. The smell of Michael's cologne still lingered in the seats. David knew what that car meant to me. It was Michael's ghost on 4 wheels, and selling it without a word was like erasing him from our driveway. I sat there in that sterile doctor's office, and while the nurse called my name, I remembered something Michael had pressed into my hands just 3 days before his death. A thick manila envelope. "Annette," he said, with that serious tone he rarely used, "put this in your dresser drawer. If something happens to me, don't open it until you're ready." After the funeral chaos, the casseroles, the endless condolences, I'd shoved it away and forgotten it. But now it called to me. As the doctor checked my vitals and told me I was remarkably healthy for my age, just needed more rest and greens, my mind was 1,000 miles away, replaying David's cold voice, Melissa's smug smirk whenever she thought I wasn't looking, and that envelope lying in the dark of my dresser. Walking out into the cool Massachusetts air, waiting at the bus stop since apparently I no longer owned a car, I smiled faintly. There was poetry in this betrayal. David thought he had stripped me bare, but Michael had always been a planner, a man who prepared in silence, and I had a feeling he had left me more than just grief. On the bus ride home, the city blurred past my window, kids chasing basketballs on cracked asphalt, couples arguing at stoplights, old men shuffling out of diners, everyone living out their private dramas, and here I was about to uncover mine. By the time I reached the quiet neighborhood where Michael and I had built our life, dusk had settled, painting the clapboard houses in gold. I climbed the familiar stairs, my knees aching, but steady, went straight to the bedroom and opened the dresser. There it was, right where I had left it, the envelope with Annette written in Michael's careful cursive. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, sat on the bed we had shared for nearly half a century, and opened it slowly, like peeling back the wrapping on a fragile gift. Inside were documents, property deeds, bank certificates, investment papers, and on top, a handwritten letter from Michael. My eyes blurred with tears as I read, "My dearest Annette, if you're reading this, I'm no longer by your side. Forgive me for keeping secrets, but I wanted to protect you. Over the years, I invested quietly, building more than you ever knew. We don't just own the beach house, Annette. We own 6 other properties, including the apartment building where David and Melissa live. We hold shares in companies worth millions. You are wealthy, my love. You always have been, though you never cared about money. Now it's all in your name." I gasped, flipping through deed after deed, brownstones in Boston, a rental house in Providence, a lakeside cabin in Vermont, even a small hotel in Maine. Bank statements with numbers that seemed like typos. Michael, my sweet, modest husband, who drove a city bus for 40 years, had built an empire behind the curtain of our everyday life. He had put everything into a corporation registered in my name, shielding it from greedy eyes. And in his letter, he warned, "Don't tell David. If he knows, he'll love you for what you own, not for who you are. He must learn the value of family, not fortune." I pressed the letter to my chest, shaking with both grief and awe. My son had just discarded me, thinking I was destitute, when in truth I held the deed to the very roof over his head. That night, for the first time in half a year, I didn't cry myself to sleep. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan shadows, feeling Michael's presence in every tick of the clock, and whispered, "I see your plan now, my love." The next morning, David called again. His voice was softer, as if rehearsed for sympathy. "Mom, just wanted to let you know we wired your share of the house and car sale to your account. It's 30%. Fair, right? You can use it to rent a smaller place. Melissa and I are flying out tonight. Business opportunities in Paris. We'll be gone at least 6 months, maybe longer. 30% of what was already mine. The gall." "I understand, son. Safe travels," I said evenly. "Knew you'd be reasonable, Mom. Love you." Click. I laughed, loud and bitter, startling myself. My only son had robbed me, patronized me, and abandoned me with a pat on the head. But the game wasn't over. He thought he had written me out of the story, but what he didn't know was that I was holding the pen now. The day David and Melissa rolled their designer luggage into the back of a black town car headed for Logan Airport, I stood at my kitchen window with a cup of tea cooling in my hands, watching them laugh and kiss like teenagers about to embark on a glamorous adventure, never once glancing back toward the house where I stood, never offering a wave goodbye. And as the car disappeared down the street, I sat at the kitchen table, spread out Michael's documents, and realized I had a decision to make. I could storm into their world with lawyers and lawsuits, reclaim what was mine by force, and humiliate them publicly. Or I could play a longer game, the one Michael would have admired, the one that taught lessons instead of just exacting revenge. Because David didn't need a courtroom scolding. He needed to understand what it felt like to be discarded, powerless, blindsided the way he had discarded me. The next morning, I called Michael's old attorney, Henry Caldwell, a tall, sharp New Englander with a habit of polishing his glasses when he was about to deliver bad news. He'd been at Michael's funeral, given me his card, told me if I ever needed anything, he'd be there. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said warmly when he answered. "I was hoping you'd call one day, though not under such circumstances." I told him about the envelope, the deeds, the accounts, the letter from Michael, and his silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the line had gone dead until he finally said, "Annette, this is bigger than I imagined. Your husband was brilliant. Everything he set up is airtight. You, and only you, are the legal owner of these properties and accounts, which means I cut him off gently. Which means David had no legal right to sell that house or the car, didn't he? Henry exhaled. Correct. The beach house was never in his name. We can void that sale immediately and recover the property. Same with the Ford, though Melissa tricked you into signing a power of attorney last fall, didn't she? My stomach twisted as I remembered the foggy days after the funeral when Melissa showed up with a neat stack of papers, her manicured finger pointing to signature lines, her syrupy voice saying, "These will just make things easier for you, Mom. We'll handle the red tape while you grieve." I'd sign without reading, too numb to question. "Yes," I whispered. She had me sign something then. Henry's tone sharpened. "We'll get that undone. But Annette, if you wanted, we could pursue charges for fraud and elder exploitation." The word fraud thudded in my ear like a gavel, but I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. Not yet. I don't want revenge in court. I want something better. I want silence. Secrecy. Can you help me retake control of everything quietly? He hesitated, then said, "Of course. But it means you'll have to play poor a little longer. Can you handle that?" I let out a small laugh, surprising myself. "Henry, after 6 months of widowhood and being treated like a burden by my son, playing poor is the easiest role I've ever had." And so the plan began. While neighbors whispered at the grocery store about how Melissa and David had taken off to Europe with big dreams, while the butcher offered me pity discounts on ground beef, while my church ladies pressed my hands and said they were praying for me since Michael hadn't left much, I carried my secret like a jewel in my pocket. Each morning, I walked to the bakery, let people believe I was stretching pennies. Then each afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with Henry's calls, learning words like liquid assets and portfolio diversification, absorbing the truth that I wasn't just financially secure, I was wealthier than most of the people who pitied me. A week later, Henry called with his first victory. "The Cape Cod house is yours again. We voided the sale. The buyers got their money back. As far as the state is concerned, you never lost it." I closed my eyes, picturing the little cream-painted cottage with the wide porch Michael built himself, the ocean stretching out like eternity, and I felt tears sting my eyes, not for loss, but for vindication. "And the car?" I asked. "That'll take longer, but I'll get it. Mark my words." That weekend, I took the bus to the Cape. The house stood exactly as I remembered, except for a couple of potted plants the would-be buyers had left on the porch. I sat on the curb across the street for nearly an hour, remembering the sound of Michael's laughter echoing off the waves, the way David as a boy had built sandcastles taller than himself, the birthday candles melting in the sea breeze. And all I could think was, my son saw none of that, only dollar signs. On the ride home, I rehearsed what I would one day say to him, how I would watch his face crumble when he realized the burden he cast aside owned the roof over his head. But patience, I told myself, patience. Back in Providence, I kept up my role. My neighbor Barbara, watering her hydrangeas, leaned over the fence one afternoon and whispered, "Annette, honey, I heard David sold your house. Are you going to be okay? You can stay with me if you need." I smiled kindly. "Thank you, Barbara. I'll manage." If only she knew. Nights were the hardest, when silence pressed too heavy and the bed felt like a hollow cave. I'd pour myself a glass of the Cabernet Michael had saved for anniversaries, sit on the back porch, and talk to the stars like they were his eyes. You were right, Mike. He doesn't love me for me, but I'll fix it. I'll make him see." 2 weeks passed, then 3, Henry working steadily, and one bright Monday morning he called with his second triumph. "Annette, the Ford is back. A friend of mine bought it off Melissa's buyer, and he's agreed to return it for a small settlement." My knees nearly gave out. "You mean Michael's car?" "It's parked in my office garage right now. Come get it whenever you're ready." I drove it home, hands trembling on the familiar wheel, the smell of leather and faint cologne rising up like a ghost. I parked it beneath the same oak tree where Michael had always parked it, laid my hand on the hood and whispered, "Welcome home." But as satisfying as these recoveries were, they weren't the end game. The end game was David and Melissa returning, arrogant, broke, expecting my forgiveness, and finding out that the woman they thought was powerless controlled their entire world. Until then, I let the mask of poverty stay firmly in place, because the sweetest lessons are the ones learned in the dark. 3 weeks after David and Melissa's dramatic departure, while they were posting photos of champagne flutes on Paris balconies and strolls along the Seine with captions like, "Living our dream," that I occasionally saw when the neighbor's grandkids scrolled Instagram in my kitchen, I was living a double life more thrilling than any they could imagine. Because in the daylight hours, I played the role of the poor widow abandoned by her only child, shuffling to the corner store for discount bread, nodding politely when church ladies slipped envelopes of cash into my purse, enduring the sympathetic glances of neighbors who whispered about how awful my son was. But in the evenings, I became someone else entirely. A woman with folders spread across the kitchen table, taking notes as Henry Caldwell explained that I now had full legal control of not only the Cape Cod house in Michael's Ford, but also the apartment building in Boston, where David and Melissa had been living rent-free for years without knowing their mother was the silent landlord. And the irony of it nearly made me laugh out loud as Henry said, "Annette, technically, you could evict them tomorrow if they were still here." And I replied, "Let's save that card for later." I'd walk past the empty driveway where their car used to be and imagine the look on Melissa's perfectly made-up face when she realized that the marble countertop condo she had bragged about to all her friends was in my portfolio, not hers. Meanwhile, life in Providence carried on with the rhythm of gossip and small mercies. Barbara from next door brought over casseroles every Sunday, insisting, "You need to eat, Annette. I know you can't cook for one." And I'd smile, thank her, and quietly donate half of them to the women's shelter downtown because I couldn't stomach more tuna noodles. But I appreciated the performance. It reinforced the illusion of my helplessness. Even the pharmacist at Walgreens offered me a discount card one afternoon, whispering, "It's for seniors on a tight budget." And I thanked him as though I hadn't signed documents last night showing dividends large enough to buy the entire strip mall. The charade was exhausting, but necessary. Henry warned me, "The key is timing. Let them believe you're destitute. Let them lean all the way into arrogance. Then, when the foundation crumbles, you'll be holding the walls." I spent evenings on the back porch with Michael's letter in my lap, his words reminding me why patience mattered. He hadn't kept these investments secret to punish me, but to protect me, to ensure that David grew up not worshiping money, but valuing family. The tragedy was, David had failed that test. But perhaps, I thought, just perhaps, there was still a chance to make him learn. One brisk Saturday morning, I boarded the bus to Boston to visit the apartment building. Standing across the street, I studied the 20-story brick tower with its shiny glass lobby, the doorman chatting with a delivery guy, and I thought of all the nights I had lain awake, picturing David and Melissa toasting champagne on the balcony, oblivious that his mother owned the very bricks under their feet. I went inside, introduced myself to the manager Henry had put in place, and quietly began reviewing tenant files, income reports, maintenance requests. It was intoxicating, this power I had kept hidden, even from myself, for years. On the ride back, surrounded by commuters staring into phones, I realized I was smiling, something I hadn't done freely since before Michael's death. But my smile faded when Barbara caught me at the mailbox that afternoon, her face full of concern. "Annette, honey, I heard Melissa told people you're ill, that you needed to sell everything because you couldn't handle it anymore. Is that true?" The lie hit me like a slap. Melissa had fabricated an illness to justify robbing me. "No, Barbara, I'm healthy as a horse. Just adjusting," I said softly, keeping the rage in my chest from spilling out. That night, I called Henry. "She told people I was sick, Henry. She used my supposed weakness as leverage." He was silent for a moment, then said, "Annette, That's exactly the kind of deception that will work in our favor if this ever goes to court. But you said you don't want courts. Not yet, I replied, staring at the shadows of the oak tree stretching across Michael's car. I want them to walk into their own trap first. Weeks turned into months. Each time the phone rang, I half expected David, but when he did call, his tone was always patronizing. Updates about how much fun Paris was, how Melissa had opportunities modeling for a boutique, how they were networking with investors. Not once did he ask how I was managing alone. But one gray February morning, Barbara banged on my door with eyes wide as saucers. "Annette, word is the bank's after David. He's in deep debt, something about loans tied to the condo." My heart quickened. The first cracks in their fantasy were showing. Later that day, Henry confirmed it. Melissa's husband, your son, took out loans using the condo as collateral. Only problem? He never owned it. You did. The banks are circling. Once they realize the mistake, David's in real trouble. I nearly laughed again, the irony so sharp it was almost painful. I told Henry, let them stew. The longer they think they're safe, the sweeter the collapse. That night, sitting in my kitchen with Michael's letter beside a cup of tea, I whispered to the ceiling, "We're getting closer, Mike. They'll be home soon, and when they walk through that door, they'll learn who really holds the keys." It was early March when the call finally came, not from David, but from Henry. His voice calm, but carrying that undercurrent of restrained satisfaction he always had when things were tipping my way. And he said, "Annette, your son is coming home. Melissa isn't with him. From what I've gathered, she stayed in Paris after a serious fight, and there's rumor she's with someone else now. David's arriving at JFK tonight." I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, feeling that strange mix of vindication and sorrow that had become my constant companion these past months. Because while part of me longed for the boy who used to bring me dandelions and sweaty fists when he was 7, another part couldn't forget the man who sold my memories like pawn shop trinkets. When Barbara came by that afternoon, breathless with neighborhood gossip as usual, she confirmed it. "Annette, did you hear? David's back. Alone. My sister's friend works at the airline and saw him dragging suitcases like his life was over." I nodded, sipping my tea, the bitterness masking the quiet thrill building inside me, because I knew exactly what he'd find when he tried to return to the condo, an eviction notice, neatly prepared, waiting like a snake in the mailbox. That morning, Henry had walked me through it. The corporation Michael had built, with me as sole owner, had formally issued a 30-day vacate order for the Boston unit David once called home, and though he would likely think it was some bureaucratic mistake, the truth was it was entirely legal and airtight. That night, unable to sleep, I imagined David's face as he unfolded the letter, confusion giving way to disbelief, disbelief curdling into panic, and I whispered to the dark ceiling, "You wanted to make me homeless, son. Now you'll taste that fear yourself." 2 days later, at precisely 8:30 in the morning, the phone rang. David's voice was frantic, stripped of the arrogance that had colored every word for months. "Mom, I need to see you. It's urgent." I let a pause stretch, then replied with the calm of a woman sipping tea by the ocean. "Good morning, David. How is Europe?" He groaned. "Mom, don't, please, not now. I got this notice. It says I have to vacate the condo in 30 days. Some company I've never heard of. Sullivan Holdings. Do you know anything about this?" I nearly smiled at the poetry of Michael naming the company after us. "No, David. I don't know much about these things. Are you sure it's legitimate?" "Of course it looks legitimate. That's what scares me. Melissa's gone, Mom. She stayed in Paris. She cleaned out what little cash we had and left me. And now I come home to this? You have to help me." His voice cracked, and for a moment, for the briefest flicker, I almost reached through the phone and soothed him the way I used to when nightmares drove him into our bed at age 10. But then I remembered the coldness in his tone when he sold my house, the dismissiveness when he told me 30% was fair, and I steadied myself. "I'm sorry you're going through this, David. Why don't you come by later and we'll talk?" He arrived that afternoon, dragging 2 scuffed suitcases, his once tailored clothes wrinkled, his face pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked like a man who had been chewed up and spat out by life, and in a way he had. "Mom," he said, standing on the porch like a boy again, "I don't know what to do." I stepped aside and let him in, gesturing toward the same kitchen table where Michael's secrets had once unfolded, where now my son's unraveling would begin. He sat, head in hands, and for a long moment, we didn't speak. Finally, he muttered, "I messed up. Melissa, she was never who I thought she was. She wanted the money, the trips, the image. She pushed me to sell the beach house, Dad's car. I thought it was for us, Mom, for our future. But the second the money ran out, she was gone. Just like that." He snapped his fingers, a hollow sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room. I studied him, seeing not just the broken man before me, but the arrogant son who had discarded me months ago. "And now?" I asked softly. "I have nothing. No home, no wife, no job. The banks are after me. Melissa signed off on loans I didn't even know about. And apparently my name's all over them. And this eviction thing? It's like the universe is punishing me." He looked up, eyes wet. "Please, Mom, I need somewhere to stay, just until I figure things out." My heart clenched, because here it was, the moment Michael must have known would come, the moment our son, stripped of illusions, would return not out of love but out of desperation. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice steady. "Of course, David. This is your home. You can stay as long as you need." His relief was palpable. He exhaled, shoulders sagging, eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Mom. I swear I'll make it up to you." But even as I hugged him, feeling the weight of his head against my shoulder, I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of the lesson he had to learn, the one I would carefully orchestrate until he understood the value of what he had thrown away. That night, as he slept in his childhood room surrounded by posters of long-retired baseball heroes, I stood at the doorway watching him, my mind a swirl of grief and resolve. "You broke my heart once, David, but this time, you'll learn what hearts are worth." The morning after David dragged his suitcases into my house, I woke to the sound of him moving around in the kitchen, and for a moment it felt almost normal, like the years when he still lived here, clattering cereal bowls and humming under his breath. But when I walked in, I saw a grown man hollowed out, his expensive European jacket draped over a chair like a thrift store find, his eyes tired, his hair unkempt, and I thought, this is what betrayal and arrogance buy. "Good morning, Mom," he said sheepishly, as if the words themselves were unfamiliar. I poured coffee, deliberately setting it in front of him the way Michael used to, and sat across the table, watching him fidget. "I need to be honest," he began, his voice unsteady. "Melissa left me in Paris for a hotel clerk half her age. She took what was left of the money, but that's not the worst of it. She put my name on loans I never agreed to, over $200,000 worth. Now creditors are calling, the banks are circling, and I don't even know what's real anymore. I thought I was building a life with her, Mom, but turns out I was just her ATM." He rubbed his temples, looking like a child who'd broken something precious. "And then that eviction letter, it felt like the universe laughing in my face." I kept my voice calm, my expression sympathetic, but measured. "David, what did you think would happen when you sold your father's car? When you sold the Cape House? When you called me from a waiting room to tell me I no longer had the things your father and I built with our hands?" He flinched, shame flashing across his face. I thought I was doing it for us, for me and Melissa, for our future. I didn't think you'd need those things, Mom. You're old now. I thought you'd want something smaller." His words were a dagger disguised as apology, but I swallowed the hurt and leaned back, forcing patience into my veins. "What's your plan now?" He shook his head. "I don't know. I applied for a few jobs before we left, but Melissa convinced me we didn't need them, said we were set with her connections. Now nobody wants to hire me with these debts hanging over me. And Mom," he hesitated, then pushed a small envelope across the table. My name was written on it in Michael's unmistakable hand. My breath caught. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. David shrugged. "Melissa had it in one of her boxes. I think she found it after Dad passed and didn't bother giving it to you. I only noticed it when I was packing up to leave Paris. Thought you should have it." My hands shook as I tore it open, revealing a short letter and a small brass key taped inside. The letter read, "Annette, if you're opening this, it means our son is in trouble. This key opens safe deposit box 319 at Providence First Bank downtown. Inside is something that can help you help him, but only if he's ready to understand what family truly means. Use it wisely." I pressed the paper to my chest, hearing Michael's voice in every word, and looked up to find David staring, curiosity and desperation mingling in his eyes. "What is it, Mom? What's in there?" I folded the letter deliberately. "Something your father left. We'll find out tomorrow." That night, over a quiet dinner of baked chicken and potatoes, David tried to apologize again. "I know I've been awful. I know I hurt you, but Melissa, she made everything sound so reasonable. She said the Cape House was a waste of money, that Dad's car was just rusting away. She said you'd be happier in an apartment closer to us. I thought she cared about you. I didn't see what she was really after." His voice cracked. "I was blind, Mom, and I was stupid." I let silence stretch, sipping my water, then said softly, "Blindness is forgivable, David. Stupidity can be fixed, but cruelty? That takes longer." His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost softened completely, but Michael's words echoed in my head. He must learn the value of family, not fortune. The next morning, we went to the bank together. David looked out of place in his wrinkled designer shirt, shifting nervously as the teller verified my ID and escorted us to the vault. The clerk opened box 319, and inside lay velvet pouches, a stack of folders, and a sealed letter. I lifted the pouches first, emptying them onto the table. Necklaces, rings, a gold watch, pieces I recognized as family heirlooms, and others I had never seen. David gasped, "Mom, this is worth a fortune." I ignored him and opened the folders. Inside were bonds, stock certificates, and accounts registered decades ago, quietly compounding into a small mountain of wealth. Finally, I opened the sealed letter. Michael's handwriting again. "Annette, if you're reading this with David, it means he has lost his way. These assets are not just money, they are lessons. Use them not to save him from consequences, but to teach him what it means to rebuild. If he cannot learn, let them go. If he can, then you will know when the time is right." I pressed the paper to my chest, hearing Michael's voice in every word, and looked up to find David staring, curiosity and desperation mingling in his eyes. "What is it, Mom? What's in there?" I folded the letter deliberately. "Something your father left. We'll find out tomorrow." That night, as David unpacked in his old room and I sat on the porch with Michael's letter in my hands, I realized my husband hadn't just left me wealth, he had left me a curriculum, a way to teach our son the values he had abandoned. And for the first time in months, I knew exactly what had to be done. The days that followed our visit to the bank felt like watching a man teeter on the edge of a cliff, and I stood behind him, knowing I could pull him back at any moment, but refusing to until he understood the drop beneath his feet. Because David, despite his broken marriage and eviction letter, still saw every solution in terms of quick cash, still wanted to pawn off the jewels his father had carefully preserved, still thought survival came from liquidation rather than learning. And it was my task now, my burden and my power, to show him that money without respect for its weight is just sand slipping through fingers. That first night, He spread the jewelry across the kitchen table, his hands moving quickly, his eyes gleaming with desperation, whispering numbers under his breath as if the diamonds and gold were stacks of poker chips at a casino. Mom, we could sell these, cover at least half the debts, maybe buy me some time with the banks, he said, glancing at me like a child begging permission. I leaned back, folded my arms, and asked, "And then what, David? When the next bill comes? When the next mistake follows?" He faltered, but pressed on. "I'll figure it out. I'll get a job, something decent. Melissa's gone now, and I can start over." His voice cracked on her name, a bitter wound still raw, but I shook my head slowly. Starting over means more than patching holes with your father's legacy. It means understanding what you lost when you sold the things that mattered most. Do you understand that yet? He looked away, shame flickering across his face, then reached for one of Michael's watches as if the tick of it could drown his thoughts. I didn't stop him. Instead, I let him sit there, drowning in the weight of what he thought was a solution, while I quietly slid Michael's second letter back into the envelope, rereading the line about lessons, not rescues. The next morning, he left with two of the smaller pieces, a gold chain and a ruby ring, saying he was just testing the waters at a pawn shop downtown. He returned pale, clutching a few $1,000s like a gambler who had won just enough to keep playing, muttering about how the market's worse than I thought. He paid off one small credit card bill and looked to me for praise, but I gave him only silence. At night, I heard him pacing in his childhood room, the floor creaking under the same spot where he used to sit and build Lego castles, and I thought, "You are still building castles out of borrowed bricks, son." Meanwhile, Henry was working behind the scenes. Every other day, he called with updates, his voice steady, professional. "Annette, I've traced Melissa's loans. Half were fraudulent, her forging David's signature, but others he willingly signed, probably under her pressure. With evidence, we can prove he's not liable for most of it. But," he hesitated, "but you don't want me to reveal that yet, do you?" I smiled faintly at the receiver. "Not yet, Henry. He still thinks the only way out is through quick money. He has to feel the walls close in before he sees the door." And close in they did. The calls began. Debt collectors with sharp voices, threats of lawsuits, warnings about liens. David tried to hide them at first, answering in hushed tones on the porch, but I heard enough to know the pressure was mounting. One evening, he stormed into the kitchen, slamming his phone onto the counter. "They're gonna sue me, Mom. They said they'll take everything. Garnish wages I don't even have yet. What am I supposed to do?" His hands shook, his eyes wild, and for a moment I saw the boy who once begged me to protect him from monsters under the bed. But now the monsters were of his own making. I reached out, placed my hand over his, steady but firm. "You fight, David. Not with cash handouts, not with pawning your father's legacy. You fight by standing up, by taking responsibility, by proving you're more than a man who signs whatever paper someone slides under his nose." He stared at me, breathing hard, then whispered, "I don't know if I can." My throat tightened, but I forced my voice steady. "You can. But you won't. Not until you stop expecting me or your father's money to save you." Over the next week, I let him spiral. He sold 3 more pieces of jewelry, each time returning with less money than he expected, each time sinking deeper into despair. Neighbors began to notice him slumped on the porch steps, cigarette dangling, his once proud posture broken. Barbara asked me quietly if he was okay. "He's learning," I said simply, and left it at that. And he was. For the first time in his adult life, he was scrubbing dishes, mowing the lawn without complaint, even cleaning gutters like Michael once did every fall. He was rediscovering the dignity of work, though he didn't see it yet. One night, after a particularly harsh call from a collector, he broke down at the kitchen table, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. "I ruined everything, Mom. I ruined Dad's memory. I ruined our family. I ruined you. And now I'm paying for it." I reached across, lifting his chin so his tear-streaked eyes met mine. Yes, you did ruin things, but you're not beyond repair. The question is, are you ready to do the hard work to fix them, or do you want another quick escape? He swallowed hard, and for the first time, I saw resolute flicker in his gaze. I don't want escapes anymore. I want, I want redemption. That word, redemption, hung in the air like incense, and I knew Michael's plan was working. Later that week, I found him filling out job applications at the kitchen table, the same table where he used to do his math homework, tongue between his teeth in concentration. He even landed a part-time position cleaning offices at night. The irony not lost on me, as Melissa sneered that he'd never stoop to blue-collar work like his father. Now, here he was, scrubbing floors to make rent, and I couldn't have been prouder. I didn't tell him that Henry had nearly finalized the legal case to wipe away most of his debts, or that I could pay off the rest with a single wire transfer. Not yet. Because this part, the working, the sweating, the humbling, was the marrow of the lesson. And as I watched him leave for his first night shift, uniform bag slung over his shoulder, I whispered to the empty house, "He's starting to see, Michael. He's finally starting to see." By late spring, the air in Providence had warmed, tulips blooming along the sidewalks, kids riding bikes past my porch. And in that season of renewal, I watched my son wear his shame like a second skin, dragging himself home after midnight from his cleaning job, his shoulders hunched, his hands raw from bleach. And for the first time since Melissa had slithered into our lives, David began to look less like the arrogant man who once sneered at my old-fashioned ways, and more like the boy who used to fall asleep on the living room carpet with Legos scattered around him. The boy who once believed his mother's embrace could fix anything. But this wasn't about fixing anymore. It was about breaking and remaking, and I knew Michael's plan was nearly complete. Henry called one Friday morning, his voice crisp with satisfaction. "Annette, we've nailed it. Melissa's forgeries, David's coerced signatures, the fake collateral, it's all documented. With this evidence, your son isn't liable for those debts. We can have the suits dropped within weeks." I exhaled slowly, staring at the steam rising from my coffee. "Not yet, Henry. Let him struggle a little longer. He's close, but not ready. I'll tell you when." And so I let the pressure continue. The collectors kept calling, though Henry was quietly blocking their paths. David thought every ring of the phone was a nail in his coffin, and I let him think it. One night he came home, dropped his keys on the counter, and slumped into a chair. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hollow, "I don't know how much more I can take. I've never felt this worthless. Melissa, she took everything, and I let her. I hurt you. I betrayed Dad's memory, and now I'm nothing." His hands shook as he buried his face, and my heart ached. But I forced myself to stay steady. "David, being nothing is the first step to becoming something better. You can't rebuild on rotten foundations. You have to strip it down to the studs." He looked at me with eyes swollen from tears. "Do you even still love me after what I did?" The question nearly split me in two, but I leaned forward, cupping his chin like I had when he was a child. "I never stopped loving you, but love doesn't mean protecting you from consequences. Love means helping you face them until you learn." He broke down, sobbing against my shoulder, whispering apologies over and over, and for the first time, I believed they weren't just words. The next morning, he announced he was keeping the cleaning job, even after one of his old college friends spotted him with a mop bucket and mocked him. "Let them laugh," he said quietly. "They can't laugh louder than the debts or louder than the shame." I nodded, feeling pride bloom in my chest. That week, he sold the last of the pawnable jewels. Not with desperation, but with a kind of grim acceptance, telling me, "This won't fix everything, but it'll buy me groceries without mooching off you." And that, more than any apology, told me the lesson was sinking in. Meanwhile, neighbors began to notice the change. Barbara pulled me aside one afternoon, whispering, "Annette, your David looks different. Not beaten down, humbled, like he finally understands what matters. I smiled, tucking Michael's letter deeper into my purse. He's learning, I said simply. And he was. But I knew the final act still lay ahead. The reveal. Michael's words rang in my mind. Use it to teach him what family truly means. So one crisp morning, after Henry confirmed all the legal knots were tied, I told David we had an appointment with a lawyer. He looked nervous, tugging at the collar of his worn shirt. "Mom, I can't afford a lawyer. I can barely afford bus fare." I touched his hand. "Don't worry about the money. Just come with me." We rode in silence to Henry's downtown office, the marble floors gleaming, the scent of leather and coffee filling the air. David shifted uneasily in the waiting room, like a schoolboy awaiting detention, until Henry ushered us in. "Mr. Sullivan," Henry said formally, extending a hand, "I've been working with your mother on some matters that concern you directly." David frowned, confused. Henry slid a thick folder across the desk. "Inside is evidence that clears you of nearly all outstanding debts. Melissa forged your name, lied to banks, and attempted fraud on a scale that will haunt her, not you. You are legally free." David blinked, stunned, flipping through pages as if the words might vanish. "But how? Who paid for this?" His eyes darted to me, wide and wet. My throat tightened as I whispered, "I did." Henry wasn't done. He pulled out another folder, deeds, account statements, stock certificates, and placed it gently before David. "And there's more. Your father left a fortune, hidden in plain sight. And your mother has been the steward of it all these months. The Cape Cod house, the Boston building, the bank accounts, even your condo. They were never yours to sell. They were hers, always hers. And she owns them still." Silence filled the room like thunder. David's hands trembled as he lifted the papers, his face draining of color. "Mom, you're rich?" His voice cracked on the word. I nodded, slowly, tears stinging my eyes. "Your father built this for us quietly, carefully. He trusted me to keep it safe, even from you. Especially from you." David dropped the folder, his chair scraping back as he buried his face in his hands. "All this time, I thought you had nothing. I thought I was helping. I thought, oh God, what have I done?" His voice broke, the weight of realization collapsing on him. I leaned forward, my own tears falling now. "You abandoned me, David. You sold our memories, our history for quick money. You treated me like baggage. And all the while, I could have saved you, but I didn't, because you needed to learn that love isn't measured in dollars, and family isn't disposable." He looked up at me, eyes red, voice shaking. "I don't deserve forgiveness." I took his hands in mine, squeezing them tight. "You don't. Not yet. Forgiveness is earned, and now you have a chance to earn it." In the days after the revelation at Henry's office, the silence between David and me was no longer heavy with resentment, but with reflection, like the quiet after a storm when the streets glisten with rain and the air smells cleaner. And for the first time in months, I could look at my son without feeling only betrayal, but also the faint glimmer of hope that Michael's plan had always promised. Though David struggled at first to meet my eyes, often muttering apologies under his breath as though words alone could repair the damage, and I let him wrestle with that guilt, because growth never comes from comfort. One night, sitting at the kitchen table where so much of our drama had unfolded, he said softly, "Mom, I want to make this right, not with words, but with actions. Tell me what to do." I sipped my tea, remembering Michael's letter urging me to guide but not shield, and replied, "Then start by standing on your own 2 feet, David. Finish what you started at that cleaning job, but don't stop there. Use what you've learned to build something that lasts." His brow furrowed, but he nodded, and over the next weeks I saw him transform before my eyes. waking before dawn, coming home with blisters on his hands, yet a spark of pride in his eyes, even taking night classes at the community college for business management, determined to reinvent himself. Meanwhile, I moved quietly to establish the Sullivan Foundation, named not for me, but for Michael, dedicated to helping older widows and abandoned mothers reclaim their dignity. And when I told David my plan, expecting resistance, he surprised me with tears. "Dad would be proud," he whispered, "and I want to help. Maybe someday I can run it." That was when I knew the boy I raised had returned, humbled, scarred, but wiser. Summer came, and I drove us both to the Cape Cod beach house Michael and I had cherished, now restored to us legally and spiritually, the salt air thick with memories of barbecue smoke and children's laughter. And as we stepped onto the porch, David froze, staring at the shingles he once signed away so carelessly. "Mom," he said hoarsely, "this place, I sold it like it was nothing. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself." I took his hand, guiding him inside. "Then don't forgive yourself yet. Just learn. Every nail in this house, every memory in these walls, they're yours to respect now." We spent that weekend cleaning, cooking, even planting new flowers in Michael's old garden plot. And on the second evening, as the sun bled orange over the Atlantic, David turned to me and said, "Let's make this house more than ours. Let's make it a refuge for men or women who've been cast aside, just like you once were." My throat tightened with pride. He had arrived at the idea himself, the same one that had been blooming in my heart for months. So together, we drew up plans turning the beach house into the Sullivan Retreat, a temporary haven for families in crisis, a place where dignity could be restored with a roof, a meal, and compassion. The neighbors thought I was crazy at first, an old widow opening her home to strangers. But when they saw David hammering new beds into place, painting walls, greeting guests with humility, their doubts turned into respect, and word spread until we had a waiting list. Meanwhile, Henry finalized the charges against Melissa, who fled to Texas under another name, only to be caught forging signatures again. He would spend years in courtrooms, but I felt no need for vengeance, because justice has a way of working itself out when you stand tall. David never once asked for access to my accounts or the deeds Henry safeguarded. Instead, he poured himself into his classes and the retreat, earning the trust of our guests, even mentoring a teenage boy abandoned by his stepfather. One night, I caught him at the kitchen table helping the boy with algebra, and I thought, "Michael, you would love this man your son is becoming." By fall, David walked across the stage at the community college, diploma in hand, and when he found me in the crowd, his eyes shone not with entitlement, but with gratitude. "This one's for you, Mom." He hugged me so tightly I almost cried. But the real turning point came 6 months later when David addressed a group of donors at a foundation gala Henry had organized. Standing tall in a borrowed suit, his voice steady, he told the story of a man who had lost everything to greed and arrogance, only to be given a second chance by the mother he betrayed. And as the audience wiped tears from their eyes, he ended with, "My mom taught me that wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in love, forgiveness, and the courage to face yourself honestly. That's what this foundation is about." The applause thundered, but all I heard was Michael's voice in my memory whispering, "He finally understands." That night, as David and I walked home under the Boston skyline, he slipped his arm around my shoulders. "Mom, I know I never undo the hurt I caused, but if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to honor what you and Dad built." I looked up at the stars, imagining Michael smiling back, and whispered, "That's all I ever wanted." In the years that followed, David grew into a leader at the foundation, marrying not for status or wealth, but for love, raising children who grew up playing in the same Cape Cod sand he once sold away, children who learned from their father's mistakes and their grandmother's quiet strength. And as I grew older, rocking on the porch of the beach house with the ocean breeze in my hair, I realized that revenge had never been my true aim. Transformation had. My son hadn't just been punished, he had been remade. And through that, our family's legacy was restored. In the end, justice hadn't come in courtrooms or bank ledgers, but in the respect in my son's eyes every morning when he greeted me with the same words Michael once did. "Good morning, Mom. Thank you for everything." And with that, I knew Michael's plan had worked perfectly, because the greatest inheritance we had ever left wasn't the money or the houses. It was the lesson that love, respect, and resilience outlast betrayal, and that even broken bonds can be reforged stronger than steel when tested by fire.